Welcome to episode 264 of the Actual Astronomy Podcast. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane. We are amateur astronomers who love looking up at the night sky, and this podcast is for anybody else who likes going out under the stars. So, Shane, we have a few Patreon supporters, actually more than a few to thank today. Maybe I'll just hand that one over to you.
Yeah. Thanks to Dave, Chef Ozzy, Charles, Gene, and John. Sort of a collection of some new Patreon supporters and some ongoing re-support, I guess you could call it. So again, we thank you all for that. And, we were having just a brief chat before we pressed the record button here, Chris. And, we have 46 Patreon supporters. So a big thanks to everybody who keeps supporting the podcast on an ongoing basis through Patreon. We really appreciate it. It helps us with the expenses and all that fun stuff that is really not that fun to talk about. But it's a reality of trying to do something like this.
It is. Yeah, I was chatting with Dave on the phone this week. Dave's a friend of mine and also a Patreon supporter. Kind of he had sort of mentioned it, and it is sort of maybe the one of the things that you, like you said, we were chatting about beforehand, is maybe trying to figure out a way to thank these folks on an ongoing basis, because when people sign up, we see it, but then it's kind of weird. Like, Patreon doesn't really send anything to tell you, like, sort of the ongoing contributors, which is weird. I thought they would. So, sometimes unless we go digging it's not really on the surface of it, who is giving on an ongoing basis, and maybe who just sent $5 or $6 our way on a one-time thing. So which we appreciate anyway. But I think I have some comments for Patreon.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but we do appreciate it, because I think, like, we were chatting about this beforehand too, is that we want to do, and Shane, this was your suggestion this week, and I think it's a good suggestion, to try to maybe take the recording a bit outside, like when we are doing sessions a bit, and do some recording. But you have some of the gear for that, and I have none of the gear for that. And we're looking at some options so that maybe we could do a recording session together, or our own observations, or together but apart. And then maybe that would give us just some different ways of sort of conveying the visual observing experiences that we undertake. It'd be nice too to be able to take some mics into the field and record with some of our friends, or like when I have a student from the class or something like that. Hey, I didn't put this in the notes, and I meant to. I knew there was something.
A surprise.
It's not a surprise to you, and it's not a surprise to at least one of the listeners. But Jim, who is a local listener and supporter of ours, he came over. He's been coming to my class. Yeah, you know what I'm referring to now. And so he is somebody who's got a 10-inch knob, and he's been coming out to my class, and actually he set up one night and really helped out with the class, and really appreciated that. And then had him out to my place, and we tried to do a bit of observing through some sucker holes, and it was kind of a fun experience. So just to hang out. Anyway, but he had, for whatever reason, ended up with two copies of the Sioux French Deep Sky Wonders book. And he gifted one of them to me and said, you can give it away in your class or on the podcast. But I actually think it's a better giveaway for the podcast, because it might be a little advanced for many of the people. For some of the people in the class, and then I don't know how I would give it away in the class too, but I think giving away on the podcast is a perfect fit for people that don't know. Shane, do you have a copy of the Sioux French Deep Sky Wonders book? Or I know I have a copy already. So
no, I don't. And I've always considered that to maybe be one of the biggest gaps in my astronomy library, because that book is often recommended and receives a lot of positive praise. So I really should just order that darn book and get it in the library.
Yeah, so the book is about deep sky observing. There's no planetary stuff. And what it is Sioux French for quite some time, maybe like close to 20 years or close to it anyway. She wrote a column in Sky and Telescope magazine on deep sky observing using small telescopes. She had a 4-inch telescope, but then also like a 12-inch portable and a couple other instruments too. But probably half or a little bit more than half of the stuff in her Deep Sky Wonders was using her, I think, 100 or 105 millimeter telescope. So it makes a great companion for people like me that are using smaller scopes. And I think for anybody that's using, the traditional amateur telescopes in sort of that roughly 3-inch or 60 millimeter range up to, a 12 or 14-inch instrument can certainly get lots of use out of the book. And so she wrote all these articles and then kind of edited them down. There was 2 copies. There was an early copy was sort of a soft cover and very slimmed down, and then an expanded version from Firefly Books, which is out of Canada here, and that contains like a really nice selection of different constellations broken up by season. So Jim had an idea. Shane, we talked about the idea early in the week for how we're going to give this book away, what's your recollection of that conversation?
Well, I'll be honest. I haven't been too up to date on our emails. I'm probably about 30 behind right now.
I think we were
a busy week.
We were texting about.
Was it a pun thing or something?
It was the pun thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So what we're going to look for is people's astronomical puns or astronomy puns, and it's got to be like with a bit of a observing slant or anything to do with astronomy is fine if it's really good. That's what we're looking for. People want to write in with their astronomy puns, and we'll give this. We'll go for I think 4 weeks, and then we'll give it away, and we'll kind of do a bit of a random draw. We'll pick some of our favorites, and then we'll kind of do a bit of a random draw. So you just gotta send us your astronomy pun to actualastronomy@gmail.com. Just be asked to enter it into the contest to win the Deep Sky Wonders book. And then the other thing Jim offered to do, Shane, which is super nice, is he's somebody who knows a lot more about shipping than I do anyway, and he offered to help ship it out too. So anyway, we'll work with him on that once we get a winner. So yeah, just send us the astronomical pun and tell us about where in the world you are. So then we'll just give like your first name and where you are, and then we can we'll throughout the next 5 or 6 weeks read off a bunch of the puns and give the book away around the second week of November. So then you'd get it in time for some winter observing. There's some pretty good winter observing stuff in there. How's that sound?
That sounds good. Let's set the date then. The submission deadline is November 5th. Okay. And then we will announce the winner on the November 7th episode.
Sounds good.
Perfect. I like it when a plan comes together.
That's right. Yeah, no, I think it's good. I think people would enjoy it as well. Okay, one thing I put in here, I'm not sure if you looked, I just put this image in here. John Creighton, who's somebody that I know personally, just lives in the next block over. And the reason why I give his full name is that he's an astro imager, and he sent me a beautiful.
He's a very good astro.
He's very good, very good astro imager. So John actually ended up taking my class because I think he said he wanted to learn like maybe a little bit more about the constellations and the stuff that he was photographing. And and this has happened from time to time, and I've had some really wonderful people come through. And so I said, oh, well, hey, I'd love to see some of your images, maybe show them in the class. And when he started sending me the images, my jaw just hit the floor. The images are unbelievable. And I mean, you can see this image of the Pleiades, which has, it's the Messier 45 up in Taurus. It's a cluster of stars, but it's got this faint reflection nebulosity around it. And then John's been working on a technique to add and subtract stars and to be able to bring out some of the fainter, like sort of dark nebulae that are around objects like the Pleiades. And these are stunning photos, that he's been producing.
Yeah, so most people I think are familiar with images of the Pleiades, and what is always striking is like the blue gassy clouds. They're very wispy. But what I love about John's image is it's huge. First of all, like it's a very it captures much more of the star field around the Pleiades than what I'm seeing.
It's not zoomed right in, but
the
level of detail is very high.
Yeah, and then what you get, as you mentioned, is all of this other nebulosity around it that is sort of darkish nebulosity, maybe. But it's very, very good. Like I love seeing an image like this presented in a way I'm not used to seeing. And again, Pleiades, it's usually more just the cluster itself is more the showcase, and it still is here, but you see so much more this way. I love it.
The other thing that John's doing, which really catches my eye, is, well, he's doing a few things. Like either he's taking images of objects that maybe we're quite familiar with, like the Pleiades, and he's applying these. I don't know whether they're new techniques or whether it's his take on it, because I'm not an astro imager. But what he's able to do somehow is, when we think about the Pleiades, we think of it sort of being awash in this blue nebulosity. And certainly he's captured lots of that. But then I wonder if maybe in some of the older images anyway that we've seen, or that I've seen anyway, maybe they're sort of adjusting like the blue tones and to bring that out, which makes it look quite beautiful or whatever. But somehow John's able to almost bring out some additional colors. So if you look at like the Rosette Nebula in there, it has a little bit of a dusky kind of reddish brown tone to it. Some of the stars actually in his image aren't blue. I think of all the stars as being a blue or white blue or something, and then he's got some orangish stars in here. And it looks like the Pleiades. Like when I saw him, like that's the Pleiades, and I look, I'm like, wait a sec, is it the Pleiades? No, it is the Pleiades. Just like his own take on it, and the detail is pretty spectacular. But he was showing me how he does it, and what he does is he's able to like decompose the image somehow. I don't know what it's called. There's a technique, and he removes the stars so that he's able to work with just the nebulae that are in an image, and then add the stars back in. So in some of the images that he sent me like different copies, one with just nebulae, one with just stars, one with them together. And he's really kind of doing, what I can say, and I don't know, it might be something people have been doing for a while, but I wasn't aware of this. I didn't know that you could sort of add and subtract the stars and the nebulae like that. It's pretty wild stuff. Had you seen that before? Maybe you have, a little bit more about imaging than I do.
I've never seen it nor really heard of it.
No.
Yeah, like I don't really follow a lot of the techniques. The little bit of astro imaging that I've ever done is like what I've always strived for is just like one frame, one shot, with very little post-processing. I've given a few talks on my approach to imaging, and I've always called it sort of lazy or very simple imaging because, the stuff that like John and others do is extremely impressive, but there's some, you don't get an image like that without effort, without some work. And, I always maintained or wanted to have like a very low touch process. So yeah, I'm not super familiar, but definitely love hearing about this stuff.
Yeah. And the one thing, maybe I'll just sort of draw it back to our more common theme of visual observing, is that one of John's images anyway, has been used in the Observer's Calendar, which I edit for the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, and is now available on the rasc.cae store. So if people are looking for copies, I did send some emails and had some conversations. I think, Shane, I was telling you about this as well earlier in the week, where something had gotten messed up with the shipping rates. So for Canadian shipping rates, they should only be around $5 or $6. I think they're running around $20 in most cases, or $15 for local delivery, and $20 odd for anything outside of Ontario. So we had some back and forth with the office, and I think they either have correct or it's a work in progress. So if folks are seeing really high shipping rates, be sure not to place the order and send them send them an email or something to let them know that the shipping rate should be not the same cost as the calendar. But John and many others, people like, that people would be familiar with, maybe like Wayne Parker of Sky Sheds and Alan Dyer and others, contribute the images. And then they're really inspirational images, like this one of the Pleiades by John. And then I sort of fill in many of the days of the year with different things that you can observe. And we have some contributors like Dave and a few others who contribute historical dates. And anyway, just sort of a really sort of neat project to be a part of. So kind of happy to be the editor of that and happy to have the first one in the bag. So moving on, we're getting into the full moon portion of this lunation now. So I've been doing some early morning sessions, but have you been able to get up to any observing this week, Shane?
Yeah, for sure. This is my favorite time of the year because by 7:30, it's pretty dark to be in the backyard, do some observing, and get a couple hours in and still get my normal amount of sleep. So I definitely love it. I was out looking at a number of things. Jupiter is what I'm really focusing in on right now. Just get as much views as I can before it disappears for another year. So this week I was using the TSA 102 with my Bino viewer, and it was some pretty good detail, particularly in the equatorial bands. But the southern temperate belt was visible, although not as distinct as it was on the opposition night. So seeing wasn't quite as good this last time that I was looking. But I had an interesting observation, and I've yet to look for some images. I should do this. Well, I should have done this already, but anyway, just underneath the northern equatorial belt, and I would say at least this night it was pretty much center of the planet. There was like another dark line, very thin, but kind of in that white zone underneath that northern equatorial belt. So it was quite present, like it didn't come and go. So I'm not sure what I was seeing, but it had to be some sort of I don't know, new feature or something like that in the cloud there. I would say the length of this was about 1/8 the diameter of the disk. It wasn't super big, but it was there. And the southern equatorial belt seemed to narrow towards the eastern limb quite a bit, actually. So I'm not sure, again, if that is sort of a result of the seeing, because sometimes when seeing is poor, I find on Jupiter that you lose some of the detail around, the edges of the disk. So it might have just been that. And then what was interesting, so we had an email from Larry, I believe it was Larry anyway, that was talking about how he was able to discern sort of the size of some of the Galilean moons through his refractor when he was like racking out of focus a little bit, that some of the disks had different sizes. And so I thought, I wonder if just, visually, if I can maybe identify some of the Galilean moons just based on size. And I was able to identify Ganymede accurately. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Okay.
But anyway, after Jupiter, I went just hunting some doubles in Andromeda, just back to the RASC double star observing list. And I'm sure I've observed these ones before, but I didn't check them off the list. So I went back, had another look, and made sure I checked them off the list. But I looked at Pi Andromeda, or Andromeday, with 12 millimeter eyepieces. Kind of an interesting magnitude contrast. The books and the planetarium software says the primary is 4.3 magnitude and the secondary is 7. But I visually it appeared greater to me, like that there was a larger difference than that. Now, it might just be that I'm out of practice, comparing magnitudes of doubles that aren't matching, but I thought that that the secondary maybe was a little fainter than 7. Both appeared white, though, in a very wide separation, very easy double. I think a 3-inch telescope would easily split that one. Then I moved on to 56 Andromedae. Again, another fairly wide pairing. I felt the primary had a bit of an orange tone to it, while the other was bluish. Now, very similar to Almac, which is, in that neighborhood, but less distinct than Almac in terms of the color difference. And then this one is also on the edge of NGC 752. And really what I should have done, like that's a huge open cluster. I should have brought out my wide field eyepieces to take that in, because I was looking through 12 millimeter orthos, and a cluster like that, you definitely need a wider field, but the wide fields were indoors and I was just being lazy that night. Mm-hmm. So that didn't happen.
Sorry, what cluster was that again?
752. I believe.
Oh, the one up in, it's sort of on the Triangulum Andromeday border. That was discovered by Carolyn Herschel, I think.
Okay.
Pretty big open. That's a pretty
Huge.
Big open cluster. Yeah.
Yeah, it's enormous. Yeah. And, I don't know what the magnitude of those stars are, but they're fairly prominent, at least through the telescope. They really jump out. I think it would be a great binocular target.
Oh, it is. Yeah. Those stars are, some of them are into like the 6th magnitude. You can see the individual stars from a dark side, and then like a bit of a haze around that area. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. It's a naked eye object at a dark site for sure.
Yeah. It's a neat little area of the sky because there are so many doubles, and then this beautiful giant open cluster. So yeah, very nice. And then the last double there was 59 Andromeday. This was the tightest of the 3 pairs that I'm talking about here. These two were almost twins in my mind. They were similar magnitude. They both appeared white. But they definitely were the tightest of the 3, and I can't remember what the separation was. Not a super difficult split. It's just the other 2 were quite wide in comparison. So yeah, that was about it. I was hoping to do a little solar astronomy, and I did some briefly, but not enough to really report anything substantial, other than I am just blown away what double stacking the etalons does for the hydrogen alpha image when looking at the sun. Just the amount of surface detail blows my mind. It is it is just so I don't even know how to say it, but in my little lunt, which was a single stack, you could see surface detail for sure. But this double stack just punches you in the face almost. It's almost photographic. It is really incredible. So I'm kind of disappointed we're getting into colder weather, because that means less solar astronomy for me. But I'll get into as much as I can before it gets too cold out. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Chris, that is me. How about you?
You said you were observing Pi, and we should have mentioned we're recording this on the Canadian Thanksgiving.
We are. Yeah, today is Canadian Thanksgiving, I guess.
So I've been observing some Pi as well, but it's more of the clear skies and apple pies variety, as Phil would say. So
yes, your pie is in the refrigerator.
It is. It is as we speak. So one thing you mentioned, this is sort of an interesting thing, and sort of speaking of Phil, we had a bit of a back and forth on this as well, and this is sort of a subjective thing, I suppose, but he was asking about eyepiece type and field illumination, and I sort of had some recent observations. I think you've sort of talked a little bit about this throughout the whole course of the podcast, Shane, but you tend to use a lot of orthoscopic and simpler eyepiece designs of the maybe 3 to 5 element variety, particularly when you're doing your observing from the city. Is that a fair assessment, or am I going off in a weird direction here?
Yeah, no, that's various. Yeah, you're right. I'm using my wide fields less and less, and I'm using the orthos more and more. Mm-hmm. Part of it is with bino viewing, I just like how much lighter they are, compared to some of the wide fields. And for me, what I find really helps with my observing to pick out detail is actually a narrower field of view. Mm-hmm. The image scale almost seems like it's larger as a result, and I know it's not, but it just feels like I'm seeing the image that it just is bigger, and I'm not as distracted by everything else. And I don't know. I think it helps, but it's obviously just in my head.
Well, I don't know if it is. And,
okay.
I was doing a little bit of experimenting this past couple weeks. And I've certainly used lots of, I have some pretty basic, I should say basic, but at the same time sophisticated eyepiece, like the Pentax 5.1 or 5.19 XO and the 3.79 XP, and I think I have a couple others in that same vein. Not nearly the collection you have, but when I'm in the city, I have noticed that if I'm want to do some serious planetary observing, that even with my astigmatism, which does impact views all the way to pretty much any power, I do tend to prefer those eyepieces versus maybe like the multiple element, larger field and more glass eyepieces. And I think I kind of have sort of stumbled upon something here that we might not have mentioned overtly, but it definitely is something that I've noticed. I think you may have noticed this as well. And that is that from the city, if you're using eyepieces that have wider fields of view, they can take in, more of that sky that might have glare or flare in it. And then as well, the one main thing that I notice is that many of my real wide field eyepieces have very large eye lenses. And that these tend to pick up a lot more of the stray light and reflection that's around. And because they're designed for using with glasses, you have to sort of sit yourself back from them, which allows more of that light to kind of scatter off them. And to be honest, I find some of the wider field designs a little bit more difficult to look through in the city, whereas the simpler design eyepieces without those big eye lenses, and which require you to get that eye right in on top of them, just naturally reduce or maybe even entirely eliminate those reflections and give you really quite a bit of a better view, even though in essence the image may be pretty similar once you kind of would control for all those variables. But I don't know, have you ever thought about anything like that? Or
I've definitely noticed, particularly your comment there about the wider, so the lens itself is just bigger on these wide field eyepieces, and they definitely do pick up just stray light, right at the entry point there, like where you start looking through the eyepiece. And it can create some really weird reflections or artifacting. So my neighbor has some weird lights hanging around their deck, and they're solar lights. There's no light switch, so they're on.
Yeah, that place looks like a casino.
Yeah, I know. It drives me nuts. I've considered spray painting the solar panel black so nobody will know, but it just suddenly stops working.
That's a pretty good idea. I'm sure they would replace it with something only 10 times as bright.
Yeah. But anyway, even these little lights, and they don't actually emit much light. They're not very bright, and they're actually pretty well shielded. But they'll like my Leica Zoom, which has a big piece of glass, or when I had the Beta Morpheus, which has an enormous piece of glass to look through, it would kind of pick up some of that, and it was annoying. So what I would end up doing is shielding my eye with my hand, so that this stray light isn't hitting the eyepiece, and that would usually do a fairly good job. But so there's that factor for sure that plays in.
Yeah. One of the things that I noticed, and I think it was Larry who wrote this past week as well. I'm not sure if you read my reply to him, or I can't remember sometimes I forget to put you in the CC when people write us both. And that's just my fault. I'm not doing any sort of purpose or anything. I just hit reply and start pounding away. And we often get sometimes 6 or 7 emails a day. So we're trying to make sure to reply to everybody. But Larry had written, and he had bought the 5mm Pentax XW, which I had bought just a few months ago. So these eyepieces theoretically likely from the same lot and everything. And he had noticed the same thing I had. So in the city, when I first was using it, I didn't care for the eyepiece much at all, because I bought it in the late winter, early spring, something like that. And then, I actually sort of had it just sitting on the shelf here. And a few weeks back, maybe 6 weeks back, I started grabbing it for the planets. And I was like, well, hey, this eyepiece is pretty much just as good as the Pentax 5 XO. And then I started kind of thinking about, why didn't I like it that first? And I think it just simply boiled down to using it in the city with all those lights. So I think, sometimes we think about using those observing hoods, like we talked about, and had had the image one of the listeners sent us of Bill Weir wearing his. But sometimes we think about those as being something just to kind of give you a little bit of an edge at a dark sky site. But I think maybe such an observing hood, or making sure you block the those extraneous light sources when you're in the city, using those wider field eyepieces actually can really improve the view, maybe more than I had really ever thought as much about. So yeah, kind of a bit of a surprise there. The other thing that I noticed is this, Shane, is that we talked about this briefly maybe a month or so ago, but like in using some of the vintage ultra wides, like you can get these 7x35s that have like a 12 or a 13 degree true field of view. When I tried those in the city, I couldn't use them on the night sky. I actually couldn't get them to focus. They just wouldn't work for me. I have to take my glasses off to use them in order to get the really wide field of view, which is fine. Not going to be as sharp, but they're not meant to be super sharp binoculars anyway. They're meant to give you a really good, super wide field of view, but they wouldn't focus in the city. So I kind of had thought I wasted my money, and I was actually going to maybe think about giving them away on the podcast or something. But I brought them out here and then started, I just one night, wanted a pair of binoculars, and for whatever reason, take my other set in and had these ones out here and grabbed them, and sure enough, could get them to focus. And I was like, So, but it was just enough. It was just enough that I could just get them to focus with hardly any room to spare. But under a slightly darker sky, I guess the focal point of my eye must change just enough that I could use those under a dark rural sky, but could not use them and get them to focus in the city my backyard is extremely light polluted. So couldn't use them in that environment. But anyway, just sort of noticing some differences. You can take something that might seem unusable in one situation, and it's really a great piece of gear in another situation, just because of the local conditions.
Yeah, that's interesting for sure. Similar thoughts. Like I have those ultra wide Bushnell, what are they, Range Masters, I think. Mm-hmm. And I don't care for them, but I've never used them under a dark sky. And I was about to sell them, and you said, just wait, try them under a dark sky. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that.
I think you got to bring them out here, and like I got some of those chairs that recline just around, and you want to get in one of those and kick back on the deck sometime with me here, and it's kind of funny. I was really surprised. Like I said, I just sort of middle of the night one night woke up and it was clear, and just kind of I'll just go out on the deck and kick back in a reclining lawn chair, and boom, I was like, hey, these do focus. These are pretty awesome. The main difference with them though is that you kind of have to move like your head and body around a lot more than you do with the others, where you can kind of just sort of move the binocular a little bit or your eye a bit. But anyway, just one of those things. So yeah, I was able to get some observing in this week though, still maybe kind of recovering a little bit from it.
Oh yeah. So you're going to sleep and then waking up early when the moon has set.
Yeah. So I think, you know me well on that one. And I think anybody who's observed with me or known me as an observer for a while knows that I do enjoy the early morning sessions, and, either picking the best times of the night to observe, and then just getting up and, because maybe in the evening and there might still be some clouds kicking around, but you see that in the wee hours after midnight, the sky might settle out and have a slightly better forecast predicted. So I might set up and do like an hour, like you said, when it's dark at 7:30 or 8 o'clock now, enough to observe. I might do an hour or two and then go to bed for 4 or 5 hours, and then get up and do a couple hours, sometime between 2 and say 5 or 6 a.m. like it is now. So yeah, I had some pretty good nights, and one session in particular was really good. I guess it was early Friday morning. I got up just as the moon was setting, and was working away on my white on black paper technique. So since put some images in there's just photographs of my sketches in the show notes. Not sure if you had a chance to take a look at those.
Yeah, I did for sure. Yep. Yeah, so, they look pretty cool.
Yeah, so this is a technique that I'm working on. It's called the Melish Technique by a guy named Scott Melish, who passed away about 10 or 11 years ago or so now. and he was an Australian person. And what he did is he created a technique which is basically using pastel and pastel dust that you create by rubbing pastel on some sandpaper, and then using just like a regular brush, like a little artist paintbrush, and applying using small strokes onto black paper, and then adding in the stars afterwards with white charcoal pencil and gel pens and this sort of thing. So they're neat because, and I don't know how you feel about these, Shane, because it is a definite departure from the traditional charcoal and graphite on white or cream colored paper. But I don't know, like what do you think? You've probably seen some of mine. You've probably seen some other people using this technique on the internet. I certainly am not an expert in it. I'm just sort of learning it, and really a very beginner intermediate sketcher myself. But what are your thoughts on the white on black technique?
Well, it's a more accurate representation of the night sky. So I think that first off is by far the biggest benefit, or what I appreciate the most of this type of sketching. What I find though, and I don't know if this is just me, but like the white is very prominent, like it really jumps out as like bright, and I'm not sure, for me at least, if this is a representation, or like the like normal charcoal on white paper seems like a better representation of the faintness of some objects, or how they transition from bright to faint within the object. Whereas with the white on black, I feel like it's just brighter than what may have been visible at that time, just because of this such a stark contrast. But I don't know, maybe that's just me.
Yeah, I think my challenge that I found anyway is that I'm just taking like cell phone pictures of my sketches, and although I always had found that my scans or images, digital images of my charcoal on I use more like a cream colored paper for my graphite and charcoal on the white paper. I find that with the white on black, the white ends up being much more enhanced than the charcoal or the graphite on the white paper does. I think it's just like the albedo, basically the luminance of having white on black. For example, there's one sketch I did of M79 and actually put in a ton of stars. And in my image, like you can't even see the stars. In my sketch, like you see the stars. That's like the main detail. And then there's sort of like haze around them. But in the image that I took of them, you can't hardly see them at all. It just doesn't come through. So I got to figure out a better way of scanning them. I'm not really sure if there's like a scanner I can get. I mean, I have a scanner at home. I might try to resurrect that. Not really sure. Might try a different cell phone or something, but that definitely is one of the challenges I'm having with them.
Yeah. I don't know much about that. I can't really comment on, if there's different ways to capture that or not.
But in person, though, I mean, they're kind of neat because they really tend to capture more of like the ethereal and faint nebulae in the deep sky objects. So I find like and I'm just kind of getting to this point now, just as I've been tooling around with it the past month or so, some of the sketches in the field. So I typically do a field sketch or 2 or 3 or 5, and then I'll do a final good sketch. Sometimes I'll do like tons and tons of field sketches before I kind of feel like I get to the point. So part of the thing that I'm kind of putting forward when I'm sending the images and that is more like a bit of a log of my ongoing process versus the final goods. And we got these giant black pieces of paper. So I found that like my huge black paper is kind of heavy, so I'm using like now a small sketching book at the eyepiece that is also black paper. So I just got this last weekend, and some of the sketches that are coming off in the field are actually a little bit more. They're getting closer. They're getting closer to kind of what I'm hoping to achieve with this. But yeah, it's a work in progress. Let's see. So some of the things sort of comparing is that it requires fewer pieces of gear. So with the graphite on the white paper, I have all kinds of pencils, whereas with this, there's only really two to use. One is the General's white charcoal pencil, and the other is the Conte. What is it? I cut it here. I'm just going to grab it here. It's the Conte 1355 or Pastel 013 France 1355. And one thing that I find with the General's charcoal pencil is that I can barely do half a sketch or a quarter of a sketch, and I got to resharpen it. The Conte Pastel goes a little further. And I bought a stick of the General's charcoal to actually make some nebulae with it. And I find that the General's charcoal is whiter than the pastel. But for whatever reason, I can't really seem to get the charcoal to go as far on the General's as that pastel. But I did a few sketches, and these are sort of good ways just to even track my own observations. I had a pretty good view of Messier 79 the other morning, which is in Lepus, just below Orion there. Have you ever observed Messier 79 there, that globular cluster that's it's kind of low on our horizon, eh?
Yeah, I've seen it many times. It has been a while since I've looked at it, but in fact, I'm trying to think. It might have been with my 12-inch light bridge was the last time I looked at it.
Yeah. So I was able to kind of see like some of the, actually quite a few of sort of these vertical star chains and trails with it. Mm-hmm. And just kind of sort of follow that around, a few bright stars in the middle, and just sort of notice that it had a tighter core, and then sort of off to one side, it was more hazy and didn't have refined or easily, like you couldn't pick out the stars easily. And then like towards the top, I could actually get some of the individual stars there. And the other thing I took a look at, this one is really a difficult object, and I've tried for it like so many times. I think I definitely have lost count. Probably more than 100 times I really tried for it and thought I had it a few times and couldn't quite confirm it, which is the Witchhead Nebula, just up off of Rigel in Orion, but it's actually in Eridanus or Eridanus. Not sure if you've ever attempted for that one before.
No, I don't think so. If I would have, it would have been with you. Probably one of the failed attempts.
Oh, yeah. And it's a large reflection nebula. I think it's around 2 or so degrees, maybe a little bit longer in sort of length or height than maybe the better part of a degree across. And it shows up really well in images, sort of like this purple, little bit of blue, and it very much looks like a witch's head. But the challenge with observing this thing is, and it is a little bit challenging, I find, to observe reflection nebulae, is that Rigel is close and pretty bright, so you can kind of get some flaring in the field of view. And then as well, any kind of high cloud or poor atmospheric conditions are going to limit what you can actually see there. But when I was out after it on the morning of the 7th, I noticed that near one of the stars in the sort of general field, and I didn't really prep too much to hunt it down. I just sort of picked it as an object for the night. I noticed that, there was definitely some nebulae, some brighter portions of nebulae near and around the star and another star and that sort of thing, and kind of more or less triangulated some of the stars that are nearby, like Rigel and a few of the other prominent stars, and sort of plotted them in, and then just kind of went after it and sort of detailed out like the general modeling in the sky that was there. But definitely on the north part or the upper part of the nebulae, like it definitely was visible. And then the bottom part was kind of coming and going, but I sort of plotted that as like sort of dabbing the paintbrush in the pastel to kind of give that mottled appearance, and that would sort of come and go. But I still wasn't 100% sure, because I don't know. I always find like when you're really trying to nail something for the first time, it's still kind of, you could convince yourself that you didn't see it. And I'm always very doubtful of my observations anyway. But when I kind of reduced it down and made a good copy inside after a couple sketches outside, then finally, once I sort of got my final sketch together, I compared it to my software and the image that overlays in the software, and definitely had the orientation right, and then had the brighter section that I had picked up I thought fairly easily was the brighter section of that nebula. So not just sort of random groupings of really faint background stars or anything. So yeah, I was kind of surprised to to be able to sort of pull it together and confirm that indeed I had observed the Witch Head Nebula. But that was sort of one of those objects that I always wanted to get a good observation of, because I remember years ago when podcasts and astronomy were first coming out, somebody had done one and was telling people that they should show trick-or-treaters coming to the door of the Witch Head Nebula. And I was like, there's no way these trick-or-treaters are going to see that from like any kind of location where you're going to have a house with trick-or-treaters coming to the door. That's going to be far too light polluted, considering from really dark skies I can just barely get this thing, and have doubted it for a number of years.
Yeah, that is a very challenging object.
Yeah.
And I appreciate how you approach that, of like very critical analysis, because it is sometimes your brain can take over and convince you that you're seeing things, and it's super important with any of those real faint, challenging objects to be extremely critical, because it's often that stuff is just on the threshold of detection.
Oh yeah,
and it's not super apparent. So
yeah, and the other thing that I'm doing with these observations, like I'm really, and I've been observing for decades, but just to continue to build my skills and to continue to push myself. It's kind of one of those funny things. I can go out and kind of whip around the sky pretty quick and show stuff to people, and always seems like a little bit of a magic trick to them probably, but they'll get to that point anyway. It really isn't. Anybody can kind of learn to do that. But then to really begin to sort of still, evolve my own and advance my own observing, I think, it's something that everybody can still do, no matter where they are in this. One of the other things that I took an observation of is the that nebulae around the Lambda Orionis region, or the Lambda Orionis ring, I think is as they call it, or the Angelfish Nebulae, which is right around the head of those three stars at the top of Orion. It's not that faint. I don't find that nebula particularly challenging. This is one of those ones that seems to sort of have slipped by, and people tend not to observe. But with an H beta or UHC filter, I find that nebula is actually quite visible, and can even get the brighter portions of that even without any filter at all. Not sure if you've ever taken a gander at that. It's a huge nebula. Did you ever take a look at that through a telescope, small telescope?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, so this is a huge nebula. I think it stretches most of the way across the top portion of Orion there, right around Lambda Orionis. I think it is just about 7 or 8 degrees in across. It's huge. And then in my sketch, I just sketched the brighter portions. But one thing I want to do is get my 50 millimeter set up and go back and do another sketch of that, because that will take in 10 degrees. And I think I can get the whole thing there. Just need the night to do it. I think I sketched it last year too. I sketched this nebula. I've sketched this nebula a few times. And then I took a sketch of the Rosette Nebulae. And that's one that you would have observed quite a few times, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is just up in Monoceros, northern Monoceros, between kind of sort of, you form like a funny angle between Betelgeuse and maybe like Procyon or somewhere in Gemini. You're going to land on the Rosette, which is a grouping of stars. Then it has this nebulosity around it, and could see like the bright grouping of stars, and could see the nebulae really easy with any filter at all. And then, I could see kind of that those stars were sort of sitting in a bit of a hollow, with still some nebulae kind of streaking through, and then, some brighter nebula right around, then some sort of fainter nebula kind of trailing off in a few different directions. Not entirely happy with the way that sketch came out, but it was sort of just sort of a fun thing. I actually had gone and observed it just because it was such a great night, and I only had like a couple hours. I had observed it, but when I came back to it after I did the other sketches, I'd taken a break and the sky had deteriorated a little bit. And then, I was sketching just as the early, the beginnings of some light maybe was starting to come through from aurora or just from the sunrise that was coming along. So anyway, that's sort of some of my observations there. I took a look at the Orion Nebula, of course, and I did take a look to try to see the Horsehead, but couldn't see that even with my H beta, and took a look at M78, I think is the one just above the belt of Orion. Took a look at that, and took a look at Barnard's loop using the hydrogen beta filter, H beta filter. So kind of did a bit of a tour around there, and then had the binoculars, took a look at the Pleiades and a few other things. But no Mars observations this time. It was just strictly trying to get in some deep sky fun while it was dark.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it sounds like you had some pretty good sessions.
Yeah, I was really, really happy to get a good sketch off of the Witchhead Nebula. That was the main one I really wanted to get. So, spent the better part of an hour on that. The other ones, I'm just kind of disappointed the way M79 came out. It looks better in my sketchbook, and the Lambda Orionis came out okay, but I kind of think that the Rosette kind of looks like one of the ghouls or goblins from Ghostbusters more than it should. Anyway, it's good fun. Yeah. Be curious to hear if anybody else. I think there's a few other people out there that are using that white on black technique, and we'll see how this practice evolves. But really, it is just about getting down to improving my observing and making some better observations and confirming what I've been maybe thinking I've been seeing, but then really being able to go back and determine that I did make an observation after all. I can convince myself otherwise just of the eyepiece, but by keeping sort of an accurate representation, then you can kind of do that. It's pretty cool.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So what method do you prefer with sketching?
Well, I've got no preference at this point. I like the way the white on the black looks, especially in my log, like in the actual sketchbook. They look really good. I'm just struggling to get them to come through. And then, just working away at it. I like using the brush. I find that sometimes, for the graphite, we tend to use like a smudging tool, like it's like rolled paper. And what I find with that is when you use that, it's more of a destructive process. I think as Mike Gatto was saying, where you're really like pushing the graphite into the paper, and it kind of can distort the paper quite a bit. Whereas with the white pastel or charcoal, as you're brushing it in, if you make a mistake, I can just take my finger and wipe it right off and get the vast majority. And I can take an eraser and get 100% of it off super easy without destroying and altering the paper. And then I can reapply. And so I'm much easier. It's much easier to edit the working on it. Whereas I find with the graphite, if you make those kind of mistakes, especially with the smudging tool, you're done because you've put the stars in, then you're putting the nebula on. And then if you have to go and rearrange that, you might as well just do another sketch. Like it's going to take so much work to fix it. But this way you have that control. But I've never used paint brushes other than for like painting a windowsill before. So I definitely that's definitely a technique that I'm struggling a little bit with.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. I think it's good to talk about like your journey of sketching, because I believe a number of our listeners are probably doing similar things. So it's good to talk about and share some learnings.
Yeah, I know it is. And it's like sort of one of those weird things where I'm a little bit reluctant to talk too much about it, because like I'm just like really a beginner sketcher, maybe an intermediate, and I have very little artistic talent. And then trying a new technique is really, I find, intimidating and fairly challenging for me to do. Whereas I know there's lots of other people out there that are much more skilled than I am. But it serves a couple of purposes, like I said, to confirm my own observations. And then as well, when they do come off well, like the witch head did come off pretty good, I'm pretty happy about it. But right now, I'd say probably on average 1 in 3, I'm reasonably happy with, and seems to form an accurate portrayal. And then the others, not as happy with, but certainly just by simply doing the sketching, I think makes me a better observer. So but I think that's worthwhile, isn't it, in itself?
Yeah, absolutely. Anything to increase the observing skills is well worth the endeavor.
Yeah. All right. Anything else to add to this episode?
No, that's it, Chris.
All right. Well, thanks, Shane. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Be sure to submit your astronomical puns to actualastronomy@gmail.com so that you can be entered into the draw for Sioux French copy of Deep Sky Wonders provided by our listener, Jim. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.